The snowstorm howled relentlessly, a cruel wind that cut through the air like a blade. Through the thickening whiteness, a small figure in a snowsuit trudged forward, his tiny feet leaving imprints in the knee-deep snow. In his hand, he held onto the frayed leash of a German shepherd, its fur matted and eyes wide with fear. But it wasn't the dog's fear that made the boy's heart race. It was the chilling howl of the wind. It was the realization that they were no longer just fighting against the storm. They were fighting against time. As the storm swirled around them, the baby's eyes locked with the dog's. There was a deep, ancient understanding between them, an unspoken bond. The baby's hands trembled, but his resolve was firm. The dog, now desperate and exhausted, nudged the boy's leg, as if to say, "We're in this together. You can't leave me." With every labored breath, the dog's strength waned. The boy tugged on the leash, but the dog remained still. The storm was closing in fast. But in that moment, the baby knew what he had to do. The bond between them was something that could not be broken by snow, fear, or even time itself. The quiet hum of the house was broken only by the soft rustling of wind outside. The storm had begun hours ago, but inside, the warmth of the home provided a comforting contrast to the howling cold that enveloped everything beyond the walls. In the nursery, a soft light bathed the room in a warm glow, reflecting the comfort that filled the space. A small crib stood at the center of the room, its white linens folded neatly, and a tiny, delicate mobile of soft clouds and stars rotated gently overhead. In the corner of the room, a German shepherd lay in his usual spot by the crib, his large body curled up, almost protectively, on the floor. His fur was a mix of golden browns and deep blacks, and his eyes, though closed, seemed to remain alert, attuned to every movement, every breath of the baby. His name was Max, and he had been with the baby since the day the family brought him home. He had watched the baby grow from a fragile, helpless infant into a little one who could barely crawl. Max was not just a dog. He was a silent guardian, a companion who had come to understand the deepest, most unspoken parts of the baby's world. He was there for every cry, every giggle, and every tiny step the baby took. But the bond between them was not just one of protection. It was one of understanding, a mutual recognition of each other's needs. As the baby lay sleeping in the crib, his tiny hands curled into fists, his chest rising and falling with the rhythmic rise and fall of slumber, Max kept a vigilant watch. His eyes were half open, and his large ears twitched at every sound. But it wasn't just the baby's movements that caught his attention. It was the soft sounds that the baby's breath made as he slept, the peacefulness of the moment. Max, too, seemed to be at peace, as though he understood the profound nature of this shared stillness. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath Max's paws. The wind howled louder outside, but the warmth of the house was enough to keep any fear at bay. This was home. The baby's small giggles occasionally filtered through the house, a gentle reminder of how far they had come from those first few weeks when the baby's cries would wake Max from his naps. He was used to it now. The cries no longer startled him. They had become part of his routine. And in many ways, they were a call to action, a request for comfort and protection. Max stood up quietly, his paws making a soft thud against the wooden floor as he stretched his large, muscular body. His eyes flicked toward the crib again. There was a slight movement, a shift in the blanket, and Max's attention was immediately drawn to the baby. The baby's small hand had slipped from underneath the blanket and was now resting on the edge of the crib. It was the first time the baby had managed to move his hand from the safe confines of his blanket, and Max, sensing the small vulnerability, instinctively took a step closer. His nose gently nudged the baby's tiny hand, as though reassuring the little one that he was not alone. The baby stirred slightly, his hand twitching at the touch, but he did not wake. Max continued to stand guard, a silent protector, his steady breathing echoing in the room. Time seemed to stretch between them, as if the universe itself had paused to observe this quiet exchange. The baby, still lost in his peaceful slumber, was blissfully unaware of the deep connection that existed between them. But Max understood. He had come to realize that his purpose was not just to watch over this tiny human, but to serve as a guardian of their bond. He would always be there to protect, to guide, and to comfort. This unspoken bond between the two was not new, but it had deepened over time. From the very first day the baby had come into the house, Max had recognized his new role. It wasn't just that the baby was dependent on him for safety. It was something more profound. Max knew that the baby was the center of his world. The dog had taken it upon himself to ensure that the baby would always feel safe, loved, and never alone. On days when the baby was fussy or sick, Max would remain by his side, sitting quietly as the baby cried, offering a paw or a nudge as if to say, "I'm here." When the baby was upset, the dog's warm body next to him seemed to calm him down, his presence providing a sense of stability. Max was a constant presence in the baby's life, always there, always steady. It was as though the dog had become the baby's first friend, a companion in a world that was still so new to the little one. As the storm outside intensified, Max's eyes flickered toward the window. He could feel the temperature dropping, the chill creeping into the house despite the warmth inside. The wind whistled louder, and the house creaked again. Max could hear the shifting sounds of the snow hitting the roof, the distinct rattle of windows under the pressure of the storm. Yet, within the nursery, the atmosphere was peaceful. The storm, with all its power and rage, was distant. The baby stirred once more, his small mouth curling slightly into a smile, perhaps dreaming. Max's heart swelled with an overwhelming sense of affection for the child. It was these moments, simple, quiet, and intimate, that cemented the bond they shared. Max curled up again at the foot of the crib, his body forming a protective circle around the baby. He had no way of knowing what the future held, nor the trials and dangers that would come. But in that moment, under the warmth of the house and the soft glow of the nursery light, he knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened, he would always be there for the baby. As the storm outside howled in fury, the bond between the two remained unbroken. It was a silent, sacred connection, a promise that neither time nor danger would ever sever. The storm could rage on, the winds could howl, and the cold could freeze everything in its path. But within the walls of this room, the baby and the dog were safe. Max settled into a deeper sleep, his large, steady breath matching the rhythm of the baby's. The baby's small hand still rested on the edge of the crib, a connection between them that would last a lifetime. The calm after the storm was fleeting. Outside, the world had transformed. What had started as a mild winter's evening quickly escalated into an unforgiving blizzard. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and the snow fell relentlessly, blanketing everything in a thick, suffocating layer of white. The world outside was nothing more than a blur of snowflakes and ice, swirling in every direction, making it impossible to see beyond a few feet. Inside, the house felt like a haven of warmth. The fireplace crackled softly, the scent of burning wood filling the air, and the comforting glow from the lamps seemed to push back against the storm's chill. The baby, now a little older, was tucked in his crib, his little body swathed in a soft, knitted blanket. He had grown, his cheeks chubbier, his eyes brighter, his tiny hands reaching for everything in sight. Max lay next to the crib, as always, watching over the baby with his unblinking, alert eyes. The dog, though calm on the surface, had been on edge for the past few hours. He could sense the storm's increasing intensity. The wind howled louder, and with each gust, the house creaked and groaned as if it, too, were struggling against the fury of nature. The familiar sounds of the storm made Max restless, and the deep, rhythmic growl in his chest was an instinctive response to the uncertainty outside. In the corner of the room, the baby shifted slightly, his little fingers curling into a fist. Max's gaze immediately shifted to the crib. The baby's movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, but to Max, it was an alert, a quiet reminder to remain watchful. The baby, now more aware of his surroundings, began to stretch out his tiny legs, instinctively kicking the blanket off his feet. His bare toes poked out into the cold air, his skin goosebumping from the chill. Max stood, his paws making a soft sound against the wooden floor as he moved closer to the crib. His gaze was locked on the baby, whose eyes were still closed, but whose restless energy filled the room. The baby's small body twitched again, and then, for the first time, his fingers curled outward toward the edge of the crib, instinctively reaching for something just out of his grasp. The dog's heart tightened. He moved closer, his body hovering near the crib as though he'd protect the baby even in the moments when he was unaware. He gave a soft whine, his ears pressed back against his head as he tried to comfort the child, as if to say, "I'm here." But before Max could get any closer, the baby's hand shot outward with surprising speed, and he grabbed the edge of the crib. With a sudden jolt, the baby's body lurched forward, tumbling over the side of the crib. His small body fell with a soft thud onto the carpet below, startling him awake with a loud cry. Max barked once, urgently, and immediately scrambled toward the baby. The dog's heart raced, his instincts driving him to protect, but his paws slipped against the floor, his movements frantic. He reached the baby's side in seconds, nudging the tiny, fragile body with his nose, trying to calm him. The baby's face twisted in confusion and fear as he looked up at Max, his tiny chest heaving with the shock of the fall. The room seemed to hold its breath for a moment as Max gently licked the baby's cheek, his tongue warm against the baby's cool skin. Slowly, the baby's cries subsided, and he blinked up at the dog, still disoriented but comforted by the familiar presence. Max stayed close, his body now pressed protectively against the baby's side. The baby reached out, his tiny hands grasping at Max's fur, and in that moment, their connection was undeniable. But as the baby began to calm, the atmosphere in the room shifted. There was an unfamiliar sound from outside, the faint crack of something heavy breaking. Max's ears pricked up, and his body stiffened. The hair along his back began to rise as his instincts screamed that something was wrong. The baby, still unaware, slowly stopped crying, his chest heaving with a mixture of exhaustion and fear. His tiny body trembled, but Max's presence helped to quell his fear. But it wasn't just the baby that Max was worried about now. The storm outside was getting worse, and Max had seen the same storm wreak havoc on the land before. Max stood, nudging the baby gently with his nose, urging him to get up. The baby, his small body still unsteady, obeyed and stood with help, clutching Max's fur for balance. The house, though warm and safe in its comfort, no longer felt like a sanctuary. The storm was changing the world outside, and Max could sense the imminent danger closing in. Max padded toward the window, his paws leaving soft prints on the floor, and stared out into the tempest. His eyes narrowed, and he let out a low growl, sensing the growing chaos outside. The wind was picking up again, and the snow was beginning to fall in greater volumes. He could feel the pressure of the storm against the walls of the house, and he knew it wouldn't be long before it would test their resolve. The baby, now standing, looked up at Max, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. His small hand reached out for Max's fur once more, seeking reassurance, seeking comfort. But the dog was already pacing, his movements more urgent now. Max turned toward the door, his growls deepening. The baby's curious eyes followed him, unsure of the urgency he was witnessing. For the first time, the baby could sense that something was wrong, something beyond the usual sounds of the storm. Max was no longer the calm, protective figure that had once stood by the baby's crib. Now, he was a dog on edge, his protective instincts sharper, more urgent. His eyes were filled with a mix of fear and determination. The room was no longer just a place of peace, it was now the quiet before the storm. Max's body was tense, his eyes fixed on the door, as though the world outside was closing in on them. The baby, unaware of the full gravity of the situation, took a small step toward the door, his body drawn to the urgency that filled the air. It was then that the break happened. The storm had pushed the boundaries of what they could endure. The baby, still fragile, felt a rising tension in the air. Max, standing beside him, was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they had crossed a threshold. The threshold where peace could no longer be relied upon, and the stakes had grown higher. The wind outside howled louder, its fury pushing against the house as if demanding to be let in. The storm had grown more violent by the minute, the air thick with swirling snow and ice. The baby, still disoriented from the fall, clung to Max's fur, his tiny hands trembling in the dog's thick coat. Max stood still for a moment, his body taut, his ears flicking back with unease. He could feel the cold creeping through the walls of the house. But it wasn't the cold inside that made him anxious. It was the growing danger outside, the storm that raged with an intensity he knew all too well. The baby, now on his feet but still unsteady, looked up at Max with wide, uncertain eyes. He could sense the shift in the air, the tension that radiated from the dog. The room, once warm and secure, felt now like a cage. Max's protective instincts flared, and he began pacing, his sharp eyes darting between the window and the baby. The storm outside had escalated to a level Max knew all too well. This wasn't just a snowstorm. It was a force that could break the very structure of their home. Max's deep, rumbling growl echoed softly through the room, his tail stiff at his side. The baby clung tighter to his fur, pressing his face into the dog's warm coat, as if seeking solace from the growing fear that filled the air. The sound of the wind slamming against the house was now deafening, but beneath it, Max's instincts were screaming. The house was no longer safe. The walls that had once provided comfort now felt fragile, vulnerable to the storm outside. The baby's small legs wobbled as he took a hesitant step forward, his tiny feet slipping on the slick wooden floor. Max immediately turned his head, his eyes softening for a moment, as if reassuring the baby that he would not let him fall again. The dog nudged the baby gently with his nose, pushing him toward the door. The baby, though uncertain, trusted Max without question, understanding that the dog would lead him through whatever came next. Max, sensing that the situation was growing dire, barked once, a sharp, urgent sound that pierced the stillness of the room. His body moved toward the door, his large frame blocking the view of the storm outside. He stood there, ears straining, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. The baby, still holding onto Max's fur, followed him with cautious steps. Outside, the snow had thickened, and the winds had reached a level of violence that Max knew could be dangerous. The dog's instincts were sharpened by years of survival in the wilderness, and it was this knowledge that told him they had to leave the house immediately. The baby, despite his small size and fragile state, was no longer a passive observer. He was growing, understanding the gravity of the situation. His little hand gripped Max's fur tighter as he approached the door. Max hesitated for a moment, as though listening to something beyond the walls of the house. The wind howled outside, the storm's fury pressing against the windows, but something was wrong. It wasn't just the storm itself that had Max on edge. It was the sensation that something was coming. Something far more dangerous than the storm. Without warning, Max turned and bolted toward the door. His large paws thundered against the floor as he pushed against the door with his weight, testing it for strength. The baby followed, now stumbling in the dog's wake, his feet barely keeping up with the larger animal's pace. Max barked once more, his voice low and commanding. The baby's small body followed the dog instinctively, as if his trust in Max was all that mattered. The door opened with a loud creak, and the cold air slammed into them with all the force of the storm's fury. The baby flinched as the icy gusts stung his face, but Max nudged him forward, urging him into the blizzard. The world outside was nothing but white, a vast, endless sea of snow that stretched as far as the eye could see. The wind picking up the snow and throwing it into the air in swirling patterns. The baby's small body trembled as he was exposed to the storm's bite, but Max was there, his body a shield against the worst of the cold. Max didn't stop to look back. His focus was singular: get the baby to safety. He knew that the storm could disorient them, could sweep them away in seconds if they weren't careful. His nose was down, leading them forward with a relentless pace. Every step was calculated, every movement made with purpose. The baby, though small and vulnerable, held onto Max's fur with all the strength he could muster. His heart raced as he clung to the dog's thick coat, his little face buried against the dog's side for warmth and protection. The snow was thick, the wind a force that could knock them off course, but Max's instincts guided them. He knew the path through the wilderness, knew the landmarks that could offer shelter. The baby, despite the cold and the fear that pressed against his small chest, didn't cry. He had no words for the overwhelming terror he felt, but he had something far more powerful: a connection to the dog who had always been there for him. As they trudged through the snow, Max paused for a brief moment, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. The wind howled louder, but there was a faint sound beneath it, a rustling, a crackling noise that seemed to be coming from somewhere near. Max's body stiffened as he turned his head toward the noise, his hackles rising. The baby, sensing Max's alertness, stopped too. His small body quivered, but he looked up at the dog with a mixture of confusion and trust. Max barked once, low and growling as his eyes scanned the horizon. The baby, though still not fully understanding the depth of the danger, felt the shift in the air. It was the same feeling he had when something was wrong. He pulled himself closer to Max, his tiny hand gripping the dog's fur with a fierceness that betrayed his fear. For a moment, everything was still, the air thick with tension, and the only sound the relentless howling of the wind. Then, without warning, the snow shifted. Max's body tensed, his growl becoming louder, more urgent. The baby clung tighter to Max, feeling the dog's muscles tighten with readiness. Something was out there in the storm, something that they couldn't see yet, but Max knew it was close. The dog began to move again, faster this time, pushing through the snow with greater urgency. The baby, clinging desperately to Max's fur, felt his heart race with every step. The storm was not the only thing they had to fear. They were in the wilderness now, and with it came a new level of danger. Max, the ever-vigilant guardian, was leading them toward safety, but the journey was far from over. They pressed forward through the blizzard, the weight of the storm pressing down on them with every step. Max's determination was unwavering, his focus unbroken. The baby, his body small and frail, trusted the dog with everything he had. They had been through so much together already, and there was no question that the bond between them was unbreakable. No matter the danger, no matter the storm, they were together. And together, they would survive. The storm had grown fiercer with each passing moment. The wind now a relentless force that seemed determined to swallow everything in its path. Snowflakes whirled in the air, each one adding to the thick, suffocating blanket that covered the world. The baby's small body, bundled tightly in layers of clothes, shivered uncontrollably. But it was the cold that seemed to matter less than the weight of the storm itself. The sense of uncertainty and fear that pressed down on them with every gust of wind. Max, his body low to the ground, moved with purpose through the snow. His muscles rippled with every movement, his eyes narrowed in fierce concentration. The path ahead, once familiar to him, had now become a maze of swirling white, a disorienting blur of snow and ice. Yet, despite the fierce wind and snow, Max did not falter. His instincts guided him, pulling him through the storm, always pushing forward. The baby, still clutching Max's fur, clung to the dog's side as if he had become an extension of him, as though the warmth and safety of the dog were the only things keeping him tethered to reality. The baby's legs, still unsteady, were beginning to grow tired, and he stumbled more frequently, his small feet slipping on the icy ground. But he didn't complain. His trust in Max was absolute, and he knew, on some primal level, that the dog would never let him fall. The wind howled louder, the sound so deafening that it was almost impossible to hear anything else. But through the storm's fury, Max's acute senses caught a shift in the air. His ears pricked up, his nose twitching as he detected a change in the wind. The baby, sensing Max's sudden stillness, looked up at the dog's face. There was something different now, something more urgent in the way Max was moving. The baby's tiny hands gripped the dog's fur tighter, as his heart began to race. Ahead of them, through the thick haze of snow, Max's sharp eyes spotted something. Movement. It was a flash of white in the distance, but it wasn't a trick of the storm. It was a shape, something alive. Max's body tensed, his hackles rising in an instant. He barked once, sharply, his voice breaking through the howling wind. The baby's breath caught in his throat, his small chest tight with the instinctual fear that Max had sensed before him. The dog's growl rumbled low in his chest, the sound vibrating through the baby's body. Without hesitation, Max surged forward, his large paws slicing through the deep snow, moving toward the unknown danger. The baby, though fearful, held on with all his strength, his body swaying with the force of the dog's movement. There was no time to waste. They reached the spot where Max had sensed the movement, and the baby's eyes widened with a mixture of confusion and awe. There, half buried in the snow, was a large tree branch, its length distorted by the swirling snow, but it was clear that it had fallen, blocking the only path forward. But that wasn't the true danger. The true danger was what lay beyond it. The branch wasn't just blocking their path, It was a trap, a dangerous barrier that could lead to a hidden ravine, a precipice that led to an endless drop. Max barked again, his voice more urgent now, his tail stiff and held high. The baby felt the tension in the dog's body, and instinctively knew they were on the edge of something terrible. The storm was no longer the only threat, the land itself was trying to swallow them whole. Max's eyes never left the fallen branch. He circled it, sniffing the snow-covered ground, his body tense with the realization that they could not move forward without navigating this obstacle. The baby? His hands trembling, reached out, his small fingers brushing against Max's fur, as though trying to ground himself, trying to draw strength from the dog's unwavering determination. Max stopped, looking back at the baby for a moment, his deep brown eyes locking with the baby's. It was as though, for just a second, they were both suspended in time. The baby, now understanding the seriousness of the situation, swallowed hard, his tiny throat tight with fear. But then, Max moved again, his body focused, his muscles rippling beneath his fur, as he slowly moved to the side of the fallen branch, his body positioning itself in front of the ravine. The baby's breath quickened, and for the first time since the storm began, he realized how close they were to disaster. If Max hadn't intervened, if Max hadn't felt the shift in the air, they could have fallen into the ravine without ever knowing it was there. The realization sent a cold shiver down the baby's spine, but it was quickly replaced by something else. Relief. Max had seen it before it was too late, had guided them away from the danger with a skill that only a dog like him could possess. The baby's heart slowed as he pressed his face into Max's fur, the warmth of the dog's body offering him solace in the face of the storm's fury. The dog's heart, too, slowed, though his body remained tense. They were safer now, but the storm had not relented. Max wasn't finished yet. With a final, cautious glance at the ravine, Max turned, pulling the baby away from the edge. The dog nudged the baby forward, urging him to keep moving. The path was still dangerous, but Max had kept them from disaster. He was their shield, their protector. And the baby, though exhausted and trembling, knew that as long as they were together, there was no danger they couldn't face. The baby, his body still stiff with fear, but slowly relaxing into Max's protective embrace, felt a surge of gratitude for the dog. His small hands gripped Max's fur once more, his heart steadying with each step they took. The storm raged on around them, but inside him, there was a deep sense of calm. He knew that whatever came next, Max would be there. The journey ahead was still fraught with danger, but now there was hope, a hope that, with Max by his side, the baby could face anything. The storm raged on throughout the night, its fury slowly subsiding by dawn, but the damage had been done. The winds had carved a new landscape in the snow, leaving behind a world transformed, a chaotic, disordered wilderness where once familiar paths were now hidden beneath layers of white. Max and the baby had made it through the worst of it, but the toll on their bodies was evident. The baby's small face was pale, his lips cracked from the cold, and his legs, though strong, were beginning to tremble with exhaustion. Max, too, was weary. His thick coat was matted with snow and dirt, his muscles aching from the continuous battle against the storm. Max slowed his pace as they finally approached a small copse of trees that had provided them with some shelter earlier in the storm. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He led the baby to the edge of the trees, where a small clearing opened up. The branches above created a natural canopy, offering a slight reprieve from the wind, though the cold still bit at their skin. It was here, in this moment of relative peace, that they would pause, if only for a while, and allow the storm to pass. Max, ever watchful, stood still for a moment, his head slightly lowered as he scanned the area. He knew they needed to rest, but he also knew they couldn't afford to lower their guard completely. His eyes flicked back to the baby, who was now sitting down against the trunk of a tree, his small hands clutching the remnants of Max's fur. The baby's breaths were shallow, his body stiff with the cold, but he had stopped trembling. He had learned something during their journey survival, and now, with Max beside him, he was beginning to understand what it meant to grow. The dog circled around the baby once, sniffing at the snow around them before lying down beside him, his body forming a protective barrier against the harsh winds. The baby, ever the curious observer, looked up at the dog with soft, trusting eyes, his tiny hands reaching out to stroke the dog's fur. The touch was gentle, as though the baby understood that this simple gesture was both a form of communication and a means of comfort. The baby's trust in Max had deepened, and in turn, Max's protective instincts had grown stronger. They were no longer just surviving together. They were becoming partners, each relying on the other to face whatever came next. The wind continued to howl, but in the shelter of the trees, the worst of the storm was no longer a threat. The baby, though exhausted, began to relax, his eyes slowly drifting closed as he leaned against Max's warm side. Max's breathing was steady, his body providing warmth to the baby, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the two of them were still. It wasn't a deep sleep, more of a restful pause, but it was enough to allow both of them to recharge. The tension that had built up over the past hours slowly began to melt away, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. Max's eyes remained open, though, always alert, always listening. The baby, still so young, had no concept of the dangers that might still lurk around them. The dog knew that they couldn't stay here forever. They had to keep moving, find more shelter, find safety. But for now, he allowed himself to relax just a little, allowing the baby to rest and heal. His sharp eyes flickered toward the horizon, watching as the storm began to break. The clouds, once thick and oppressive, were now shifting, revealing patches of blue sky. It was a slow transformation, but it was enough to give Max hope. For the baby, the world had become a confusing place, filled with both wonder and fear. But as he lay there against Max's fur, he began to feel the weight of the day's events settling in. The cold had numbed his body, but the warmth of the dog beside him began to thaw something deeper within him. The understanding that no matter how fierce the storm, no matter how terrifying the dangers of the world outside, Max would always be there to protect him. And that protection, that quiet, unwavering presence, was something that the baby had begun to realize was more valuable than anything else. Max, sensing that the baby's energy was returning, gently nudged him with his nose. The baby stirred, blinking up at him with tired eyes. A soft smile played at the corners of his lips, his hands once again reaching out for the dog. Max's gaze softened as he nuzzled the baby's tiny hand, offering him comfort without words. The baby, though still fragile, had grown stronger in the time they had spent together. He had learned how to face the fear that had once paralyzed him. And though he didn't fully understand everything that had happened, he understood one thing for sure: Max was his protector. Max was his strength. The baby now stood, his legs shaky but determined. He looked up at Max, his eyes wide with both curiosity and a kind of newfound understanding. Max, sensing the baby's need to move forward, rose to his feet as well. He shook off the snow from his fur, his body now alert, ready for whatever lay ahead. The storm, though not over, was no longer an immediate threat, and Max knew that it was time to continue their journey. Max nudged the baby toward the path ahead, urging him to move with him. The baby, still holding onto Max's fur, took hesitant steps, his legs unsteady but growing stronger with every movement. He was no longer the same fragile child who had first ventured out into the storm. He was learning, he was growing, and with Max by his side, he felt a courage rising within him, a quiet but unshakable determination to face whatever came next. Max, ever the silent guardian, led the way, his sharp eyes scanning the path ahead. The bond between them, once fragile and new, had deepened into something far more profound. They were no longer just two creatures struggling to survive in a harsh world. They had become a team, partners, bound together by something far greater than the challenges they faced. As they walked, the sky continued to clear. The winds, though still strong, no longer felt like a threat. The snow had stopped falling, leaving a world that, though cold and barren, was now filled with potential. The landscape stretched out before them, vast and open, yet the path ahead was still unclear. But with each step, Max and the baby grew stronger, more certain of their bond, more certain of the journey ahead. The storm had passed, but the echoes of its fury lingered, both in the world outside and within the hearts of Max and the baby. The air had cleared, leaving behind a crisp, icy silence that seemed to stretch on forever. The ground was hard and compacted, a frozen wasteland of white, and the trees, once strong and green, now stood bare, their branches shaking with the remnants of the storm's wrath. Even though the sky had turned a soft, pale blue, the world felt colder now, emptier. The quiet of the wilderness was not soothing. It was a stark reminder of the dangers that lay in wait, just beyond the horizon. Max moved cautiously, his senses heightened as he led the baby through the snow-covered landscape. The wind, though calmer now, still carried with it an unsettling chill that seemed to gnaw at the edges of their resolve. The dog's muscles were stiff from hours of trudging through the snow, but his steps were purposeful. His eyes, though soft when he glanced at the baby, were still filled with a deep wariness. Max had always been the protector, but something had shifted. The bond they shared, once an instinctual, quiet connection, had deepened into something more complex. They had seen the raw force of nature, the chaos of the storm, and both had been changed by it. The fear still clung to them, like the remnants of the wind that would not let go. The baby, though smaller and less aware of the full scope of the danger, could feel the shift in the air. There was an unease that lingered, an unspoken fear that he could not name, but understood in the way Max moved, in the tension that seemed to tighten every muscle in the dog's frame. The baby's small hands, still grasping at Max's fur, trembled slightly as they continued to walk through the cold expanse. His feet, though stronger than before, still slipped occasionally on the icy surface, and his legs wobbled with exhaustion. But it wasn't just the physical toll that weighed on them. The emotional aftermath of the storm had taken root deep inside them. The baby's once innocent trust in the world had been shaken. He no longer saw the world around him as a place of absolute safety. The storm had torn that illusion away. The fear he had felt during the worst of it, when Max had nudged him to move forward, when the blizzard had blocked their path, when the ice had felt like it might swallow them whole, had not disappeared with the storm. It lingered, a quiet shadow at the edge of his consciousness. He could still hear the wind, could still feel the tremors in his small body as he clung to Max. And though the storm had passed, its impact remained. Max, too, carried the weight of the storm. The dog had always been calm, steady, a creature of instinct. But now, there was something different in the way he moved. His steps were more cautious, his head constantly turning, as though searching for a threat that might emerge from the quiet. Max had seen the worst of nature before, but the intensity of this storm had been different. It had tested him, pushed him beyond his limits. He had never felt so close to failure. And now, as they walked through the remnants of the snow-covered world, Max felt the unease settle deep in his chest. It was not fear that he felt. It was the memory of that fear. The storm had been a reminder of just how fragile life could be. And the baby, though still unaware of the full extent of that fragility, had become more aware with every step. They stopped for a moment, Max sitting on the snow-covered ground, his large body acting as a shield against the cold. The baby, sensing the dog's need for a break, also sat beside him, his small face tired but determined. For a moment, there was peace between them, a brief respite from the overwhelming tension that had become their world. The baby leaned against Max's side, his tiny hand still gripping the dog's fur, as though it was the only thing holding him together. But even in this quiet moment, the fear did not fully dissipate. The baby's eyes flickered to the horizon, where the storm had once been. The wind was still present, though now it seemed less threatening, more like an echo of the storm's former rage. Yet, to the baby, it still felt as though something was lurking just out of sight. The world around him was still vast and unpredictable. His small chest tightened as a wave of uncertainty washed over him. Max, sensing the shift in the baby's demeanor, gently nudged him with his nose, offering a moment of reassurance. The dog's gaze softened, and for the first time since they had emerged from the storm, Max allowed himself to relax. Just slightly. The baby, feeling the dog's warmth, began to calm, though his eyes remained fixed on the open space ahead, still unsure of what lay beyond the snow. It was in this quiet moment of shared uncertainty that Max's bond with the baby deepened. The dog understood something the baby had not yet fully grasped, that fear could be a powerful force, but it could also be a guide. Fear, when faced with courage, could lead to growth. And in this moment, Max realized that they were not just surviving the storm. They were learning from it. The baby, though young, had already begun to understand the delicate balance between trust and caution. And Max, though ever watchful, had learned to rely on the baby's resilience as well. Max gently nudged the baby again, this time encouraging him to stand. The baby's legs, though still weak, were growing stronger with each step. They had come a long way since the storm had first hit. And though they had not yet reached safety, they were closer than they had been before. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with each other, they had found something that transcended the fear, the unbreakable bond between them. The baby, his small body tired but resolute, stood with Max's help, his hands gripping the dog's fur with a quiet strength. He looked up at the dog, his eyes filled with a mixture of trust and understanding. He was not afraid of the storm anymore. Not fully. He had learned that fear was not something to be avoided, but something to be faced, something that could be overcome. With Max by his side, he knew that there was no challenge too great for them to face together. Max, sensing the baby's newfound strength, rose to his feet, his large form towering over the baby. His eyes softened as he nudged the baby forward, leading him through the snow once more. The fear still lingered in the air, but it no longer controlled them. They were no longer victims of the storm. They had become survivors, and together, they would continue to grow. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the world around them shifted once again. The air had cooled significantly, the once blue sky now a fading violet, the last traces of daylight vanishing into the horizon. The snow, now a silvery, white in the dimming light, reflected an eerie glow that made the landscape appear otherworldly. It was beautiful but unsettling, quiet, empty, and cold. Max's ears flicked at every sound, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings with a deep sense of alertness. The baby, his small body growing heavier with exhaustion, clung to the dog's fur as they walked. His steps had slowed, his little feet dragging through the snow. But he had learned to rely on Max's presence to steady himself. The storm may have passed, but the world around them still felt dangerous, unpredictable. And the night was always worse than the day. Max had always been a protector, but there was a new edge to his movements now, a caution that hadn't been there before. His body, once calm and sure, now moved with a measured, deliberate pace, his gaze constantly shifting from side to side. The baby, still not fully understanding the weight of the danger, could feel the shift in the air. There was something about the night that unsettled him. The way the world seemed to shrink, the shadows casting long, eerie shapes against the snow-covered ground. The sounds of the wind had dulled, but it was replaced by the haunting silence that seemed to close in on them, pressing against their skin, filling the air with an uncomfortable weight. Max's instincts were sharp, but even he could not shake the unease that surrounded them. They had entered an unfamiliar part of the forest, the trees now dense and looming. The soft crunch of snow beneath their feet was the only sound breaking the silence, but even that felt unnatural, amplified in the stillness. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The baby's small hand gripped Max's fur tighter as they walked deeper into the darkening woods. His eyes, wide with an unspoken fear, scanned the trees around them. He didn't fully understand why he felt afraid, but the shadows seemed alive, swirling around them like a hidden threat. Each tree looked like a looming figure, its branches reaching out in twisted forms, like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. The snow, now eerily quiet, seemed to muffle every sound, as if the very ground was hiding something from them. Max stopped, his body suddenly rigid, and the baby, sensing the shift, stopped too. The air seemed to grow colder, and the silence was thick, heavy with the promise of something unknown. Max's nostrils flared as he sniffed the air, his deep brown eyes narrowing with a mixture of fear and concentration. Something was wrong. He could feel it. A rustle in the bushes to their left caught his attention. Max's muscles tensed, his body coiling like a spring ready to release. The baby, still clinging to Max, felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. The fear that had been building inside him since the storm began now surfaced in full force. His heart thudded in his chest, and his small body trembled as he instinctively pressed closer to Max. Max growled low in his throat, a warning sound. and the baby's grip on his fur tightened in response. The rustling came again, louder this time, and then there was a soft, menacing snarl from the shadows. The baby's breath caught in his throat, his small hands gripping the dog's fur so tightly it hurt. Max's head whipped around, his eyes scanning the darkening forest for any sign of movement. Then, from the darkness, a pair of glowing eyes appeared, piercing through the night like a warning beacon. Max's hackles raised, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. The air around them seemed to vibrate with the tension, the silent understanding between Max and the baby now palpable. Max wasn't just a protector anymore. He was a warrior, standing between the baby and the unknown threat, ready to defend with every ounce of strength he had. The glowing eyes moved closer, and the baby, still clinging to Max's fur, felt a cold rush of fear grip him. He didn't know what it was, what kind of creature lurked in the shadows, but he knew one thing for sure: it was dangerous. The rustling grew louder, and the form of a large animal, its fur dark as the night itself, slowly emerged from the shadows. Max's growl deepened, and the baby, his eyes wide with terror, watched in silent awe as the dog took a protective stance in front of him. The creature in front of them was no ordinary animal. Its body was large, its shoulders heavy with muscle, and its teeth glinted in the dim light, sharp and menacing. But what struck the baby most was its eyes, pale, almost white, as if they were made of ice, cold and calculating. Max stepped forward, his body poised in a defensive stance, his growl growing louder, more threatening. The creature didn't flinch. Its eyes locked onto Max with an unsettling calmness. It was a challenge, a silent battle of wills. Max knew the rules of this unspoken war. He had to defend the baby at all costs, even if it meant facing this creature alone. The baby, though still terrified, took a small step closer to Max. His small, trembling hand reached out, touching the dog's fur for reassurance. In that moment, Max felt the baby's fear, but he also felt something else. A quiet, unspoken strength. The bond between them had grown stronger with each passing day, and now, in the face of this unknown terror, the baby was showing a kind of courage that mirrored his own. Max turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting the baby's for just a moment. There was no need for words. The message was clear. They would face this together. The creature in front of them shifted slightly, its muscles rippling beneath its dark coat as it took a slow, deliberate step forward. Max's growl intensified, and the baby's small body pressed tighter against the dog's side. Every instinct told him to run, to flee from the danger that loomed, but the pull of the bond between him and Max kept him rooted in place. He would not leave the dog's side. Not now. Not ever. The creature paused, as though evaluating them both, its glowing eyes flicking from Max to the baby. It seemed to recognize the bond between them, the unspoken trust that had been forged in the fires of their journey. And then, as if deciding that the risk was not worth it, the creature slowly backed away, its gaze never leaving them as it melted into the shadows from which it had come. Max, still on edge, didn't move for several moments, his body tense and ready for anything. But as the creature disappeared, swallowed by the darkness, the growl in Max's chest slowly dissipated, his body relaxing. The baby, though still shaken, felt the tension ease from Max and began to calm as well. For a moment, everything was still. The wind whispered through the trees, the snow continuing to fall softly, and the creatures of the night resumed their quiet existence in the distance. Max, though still vigilant, turned his attention back to the baby, his eyes softening. The baby, his tiny body shaking from the cold and fear, pressed himself into Max's side once again. He didn't fully understand what had just happened, but he knew one thing for sure: Max had kept him safe. And that was all that mattered. The shadows of the night had tested them, but they had come through it together. And for the first time since the storm, the baby felt a small spark of hope. Hope that, with Max by his side, there was no danger they couldn't face. The night had passed, and with it came the slow, steady light of dawn. The world outside, though still cold, was bathed in the pale glow of morning. The snow-covered landscape, now sparkling like millions of tiny diamonds under the first rays of the sun, looked peaceful, almost serene. But there was a lingering tension in the air, a sense of unease that neither Max nor the baby could shake. Max's body was tired, his muscles aching from the long journey, but his instincts remained sharp. His ears twitched at every sound, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He had always been a protector, but now, more than ever, he knew that his role was not just to guard the baby physically, but emotionally as well. The bond between them had deepened in ways that he could never have anticipated, and with each passing day, he realized just how much the baby relied on him, not just for protection, but for reassurance and safety. The baby, though still small and fragile, had begun to grow in ways that Max could feel. His steps were more confident now, his body steadier as he moved beside the dog. The fear that had once been so overwhelming was still there, lingering in the back of his mind, but it was no longer paralyzing. The baby had learned to walk with the uncertainty of the world pressing down on him. With Max by his side, he had begun to understand that fear was not something to be avoided but something to be faced. Max stopped at the edge of the clearing, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. The baby, who had been walking alongside him, paused as well, looking up at Max with wide eyes. He didn't fully understand what the dog was sensing, but he trusted Max implicitly. The dog's watchful gaze told him everything he needed to know. Something was out there. For a brief moment, the baby felt the old wave of fear rise in his chest. He could feel it in the way Max's body stiffened, in the intensity of the dog's focus. But as he looked up at the dog, he found solace in the steady rhythm of Max's breathing. The dog was there. He was always there. No matter the danger, no matter how dark or frightening the world became, the baby knew that Max would protect him. The dog moved forward cautiously, his steps slow but sure. The baby followed closely, his small hand still gripping Max's fur. Together, they moved through the forest, the thick trees now casting long shadows across the snow. The world felt different in the daylight, less hostile, less isolating. But there was still a sense of something lurking just beyond the safety of the trees. Max stopped once again, his eyes scanning the area with precision. The baby, though unsure of what the dog was sensing, felt the change in the air. He could hear it now. The soft rustling of the trees, the distant calls of birds, the quiet shifting of animals in the underbrush. But there was something else, something hidden beneath those sounds. The air was thick with the tension of an approaching presence, something unfamiliar and possibly dangerous. Max turned his head toward the baby, his gaze softening for a moment before he nudged the small child forward, urging him to stay close. The baby, though still afraid, obeyed without question, pressing himself closer to Max's side. In that moment, the dog's role as his protector became clear. It wasn't just about physical safety, it was about trust. The baby trusted Max to guide him through the uncertainty of the world, to shield him from the dangers that lurked in the shadows. As they continued, the tension in the air grew palpable, the quiet too heavy, too still. Max's senses were on high alert, his body tense with every rustle, every shift in the breeze. And then, suddenly, from the trees ahead, a figure emerged, a deer, its slender body barely visible against the backdrop of the snow. The animal's large, dark eyes locked onto Max's, and for a moment, neither moved. Max's body was still, his muscles coiled like a spring, ready to leap into action at any moment. The baby, though curious, remained silent, his eyes wide as he watched the deer. There was no fear in the way the baby looked at the creature. There was only wonder. The world around them had always seemed so large, so full of unknowns, but in this moment, the baby felt a sense of peace. He wasn't alone. He had Max. Max didn't move, his eyes never leaving the deer. He understood that the animal was not a threat, but his instincts told him to remain vigilant. His job wasn't to chase the deer, wasn't to harm it, it was to protect the baby, to keep him safe from whatever danger might arise. The deer, sensing the dog's presence, slowly backed away, its graceful form disappearing into the trees as silently as it had appeared. The baby, though still tense, exhaled slowly, feeling the tension of the moment ebb away. He looked up at Max, his small hand resting on the dog's fur. Max's calm gaze met the baby's, and for a brief moment, the bond between them seemed to deepen even further. The baby was no longer just a passenger on this journey. He was part of it. He was beginning to understand the rhythm of the world, the balance between fear and courage, between trust and uncertainty. Max gave a soft huff, a low sound of reassurance, and began to move forward once more, his body still as a sentinel, his senses alert. The baby followed, his steps more confident now, the fear from earlier dissipating in the presence of the dog's steady protection. They continued through the forest, side by side, with Max always a few steps ahead, watching, guiding, guarding. The baby, though still small and vulnerable, had begun to grow in ways that only time could reveal. He was learning to walk through the world with Max as his guide, learning to trust not only the dog but also himself. The baby's eyes glanced up at Max again, his small face soft with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. The dog's steady pace, his watchful presence, and his unwavering loyalty had taught the baby something profound. Max wasn't just a dog. He wasn't just a protector. He was a teacher, a guide, a silent strength that the baby would carry with him, no matter where their journey took them. For Max, the bond had never been about survival alone. It had always been about something deeper, the connection that had formed between him and the baby from the very first moment they had met, the trust they had built, the shared moments of fear, of growth, of understanding. These were the true foundations of their relationship. And now, with each step they took through the wilderness, Max knew that he wasn't just guiding the baby through the physical dangers of the world. He was guiding him through the emotional and psychological journey of growing up, of learning to face the world with courage, with compassion, and with love. Together, they walked on, the shadows of the forest stretching long behind them, but with each step, the light ahead seemed a little brighter. The world outside had settled into an eerie silence. The snow still covered the ground, blanketing the landscape with a pristine, untouched layer of white. The trees stood still, their branches heavy with the weight of the storm that had passed, the winds now gentle whispers in the distance. Max and the baby had found a new place to rest for the night. A small clearing near a stream, the water flowing softly, its gentle sound providing a sense of peace in the otherwise still world. But peace was elusive. Even in this moment of calm, neither Max nor the baby could fully escape the echoes of the storm that had passed. The emotional toll of the journey they had taken together had left scars, ones that were not immediately visible, but that were no less real. They both carried them now, these quiet remnants of fear, of survival, of memories that would linger long after the storm had passed. Max lay beside the baby, his large body stretched out on the cold earth. His head was resting on his paws, his eyes half closed but alert. The baby, though exhausted, was still awake. His small body curled against Max's side. His breaths were slow but shallow, the weight of the day's events pressing heavily on his young mind. The baby's face was turned toward the dog, his small fingers resting gently on Max's fur. He could feel the warmth of the dog's body, the steady rise and fall of his chest. But it wasn't enough to ease the uncertainty that gripped him. Max could sense it. The restlessness in the baby's body, the soft tremors that shook him from time to time. The storm, though physically over, still raged within the baby's heart. Max understood this in a way that was almost instinctive. He had witnessed it before in the animals he had protected. The survivors who carried the weight of fear with them, long after the danger had passed. The storm they had weathered had not just been one of nature. It had been one of the mind and spirit. And even though the world around them was calm, the storm within them had not yet subsided. Max's heart stirred with an overwhelming sense of compassion. He nudged the baby gently with his nose, offering what little comfort he could. The baby, though still restless, felt the familiar touch and instinctively curled closer to the dog. The warmth of Max's body, the rhythmic sound of his breathing, became a steady anchor for the baby's turbulent thoughts. The baby's eyes fluttered shut for a moment, but his mind raced with images from the past few days. The storm, the fear, the dangers they had faced together. The darkness of the night had never seemed so oppressive, and though the day had brought light, it hadn't erased the terror that had taken root deep inside the baby's heart. His small chest tightened, and he clutched tighter to Max's fur, as if seeking something, anything, that could bring him comfort. Max, sensing the baby's unease, shifted closer, curling his body around the child protectively. The dog's warmth seeped into the baby's body, the steady presence of his protector offering a silent reassurance that, Despite the fears that lingered, he was not alone. Max's body, firm and steady, was a reminder that some things could not be taken away by the storm. Love, protection, trust. These were the things that would carry them through. The baby's mind drifted, his thoughts becoming a haze of images from the storm. He remembered the sound of the wind, the cold that had bitten at his skin, the terror of not knowing where they were going, or whether they would make it through the night. He remembered the creature that had emerged from the shadows, the fear that had gripped his chest as Max had stood firm between him and the unknown danger. The baby's heart had raced then, and it still raced now, the memory of the threat hanging over him like a dark cloud. But in that moment, as he lay curled against Max, the baby began to understand something. He could face that fear. The storm had come, and they had survived. The darkness had come, and Max had kept him safe. The baby's small hand, trembling slightly, reached for Max's ear, gently stroking the soft fur. The dog's eyes flickered open, meeting the baby's gaze with a quiet understanding. Max didn't need words to know what the baby was feeling. He had been there, and he would always be there. The baby, feeling the steady rhythm of the dog's breath beneath him, began to relax. The grip on Max's fur loosened, and for the first time since the storm had hit, the baby felt the weight of his own fear begin to lift. The storm within him had not disappeared, but it had settled into something more manageable. It was no longer the overwhelming, paralyzing fear of the unknown. It had become a part of him, something he could live with, something he could face. Max's steady presence was the anchor that kept the baby grounded, and in that moment, the baby understood that he didn't have to carry the fear alone. He had Max. He had the strength of the dog beside him, and together, they could face whatever came next. Max, though still alert, felt the tension leave the baby's body. He could feel the shift, the moment when the fear began to ebb away, replaced by a quiet sense of hope. The baby wasn't just surviving anymore. He was beginning to heal. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, Max knew that the journey they had taken together had made them stronger. As the night deepened, the world around them quieted further. The snow continued to fall gently, covering the earth in a soft, silent blanket. Max's eyes closed. His body relaxed as the baby lay against him, finally drifting into a deep, peaceful sleep. The storm within them had not disappeared completely, but it had been transformed. The fear had not been erased, but it had been shared, and in sharing it they had found strength. Max, ever the guardian, remained watchful, his eyes scanning the night for any sign of danger. But for the first time in days, he allowed himself to rest. His body fully relaxed beside the baby. The bond between them had deepened in ways that neither of them could have anticipated. They had faced the storm together, and now, with the night calm and still, they could face whatever challenges came next, together. The world had grown quiet once more, the silence stretching for miles in every direction. Max and the baby had continued their journey, moving through the wilderness with a renewed sense of purpose. The snow had begun to let up, and the light of the sun, though faint and weak, peeked through the thinning clouds, casting a soft glow on the white landscape. It was the first real sign of hope since the storm, the first glimpse of a future beyond the chaos they had endured. But hope was fragile, fleeting. As much as they longed for peace, the reality of their journey had taught them that danger was never far behind. Max, ever vigilant, moved with his usual grace, his senses alert to every rustle of the wind, every shift in the snow. The baby, though no longer as fragile as before, was still small, his steps clumsy and unsure on the icy terrain. He stumbled now and then, but Max was always there, gently nudging him forward, guiding him through the wilderness with a protective presence that had become a steady part of the baby's world. Despite the peace that had settled over them, there was still something in the air, something Max could sense that the baby could not yet fully comprehend. The tension in the dog's body had not fully dissipated. His eyes scanned the trees, his ears flicking at every sound, every movement. It wasn't just the landscape that felt ominous. It was the very silence around them that seemed to press in on them, as though the world itself was holding its breath. And then it came. A low, guttural growl broke the silence, sending a wave of tension rippling through the air. Max's body went rigid, his hackles raising in a sudden show of aggression. The baby, still walking beside the dog, froze, his small body tense with confusion and fear. He looked up at Max, sensing the sudden change in the dog's demeanor, but unsure of what it meant. Max turned his head, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of paws crunching through the snow. Max's stance shifted, his body coiling, ready to spring into action. His ears flattened against his head, and his eyes locked onto the source of the sound. The baby, still unsure of the full extent of the danger, clung tightly to Max's fur, his small hands trembling with a mix of fear and trust. He had learned that when Max moved like this, something was wrong. Something was coming, and it wasn't good. The growl grew louder, more menacing, and from the edge of the clearing, a dark shape emerged. It was a large, wild animal. A wolf, its fur matted and dirty, its teeth bared in a snarl that sent a chill through the air. Its eyes glowed with hunger, its focus entirely on the baby and Max. The wolf's body was lean, its muscles rippling beneath its fur, and it moved with a silent, predatory grace that made the baby's heart race. Max didn't hesitate. He barked once, a sharp, commanding sound that reverberated through the stillness. The wolf paused, its eyes narrowing in response. It had not expected the dog's challenge. Max stood tall, his body rigid with tension, every muscle coiled, ready to defend. The baby, his small body pressed tightly against Max's side, could feel the dog's heart pounding in his chest. The fear that had once overwhelmed him now settled into something more tangible, something primal. Max's growl deepened, a sound that was both a warning and a promise. The wolf, sensing the dog's strength, took a step back, but its hunger was palpable. It could see the baby, small, vulnerable, and alone. The wolf's instincts told it that this was its prey. It moved forward again, but this time, it was cautious, knowing that the dog would not back down. The air was thick with tension as Max stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the wolf's. The baby, still clinging to Max, could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His chest was tight, his small heart racing with fear. He wanted to scream, to run, to escape, but he stayed still, trusting Max to protect him. He had learned, over the past days, that Max was the one constant in his life, the one thing that had kept him safe, kept him alive. And now, as the wolf approached, the baby's trust in the dog was unwavering. Max took another step forward, his body positioned between the baby and the wolf. The wolf snarled, its eyes flashing with a mixture of fear and defiance. But it didn't back down. The two animals were locked in a silent battle of wills. The baby's hands tightened around Max's fur, his fear building, but his trust in the dog was stronger than anything else. And then, without warning, the wolf lunged. Max's body moved in a blur, his powerful muscles propelling him forward with an explosive force. He met the wolf mid-stride, the two animals colliding with a force that sent a spray of snow into the air. Max's teeth sank into the wolf's fur, his body twisting with the effort to keep the larger animal from reaching the baby. The wolf snarled, its claws raking against Max's side, but Max held firm, refusing to let the predator pass him. The baby, though terrified, did not look away. He watched as Max fought with everything he had, his teeth bared, his body a protective shield between the baby and the wolf. The sound of their struggle, the growls, the snarls, the thud of paws against the snow, filled the air, but the baby remained silent, his small hands still gripping Max's fur, his eyes wide with fear, but also with awe. Max fought with every ounce of strength he had, his body battered by the wolf's claws, but his determination unwavering. With one final, powerful push, he forced the wolf back, his teeth sinking into the animal's neck with a powerful growl that sent the predator scrambling away. The wolf, bloodied and beaten, retreated into the trees, its eyes flashing with a mixture of fear and defiance before it disappeared into the shadows. Max stood still for a moment, his body heaving with exhaustion, his side bleeding from the wolf's claws. His eyes flicked to the baby, who had remained frozen at his side, wide-eyed and breathless. The baby's body trembled, his small face pale with fear, but his eyes were locked on Max, filled with gratitude and awe. Max, though battered and bruised, nudged the baby gently with his nose, his growl softening. The baby, still shaken, slowly reached out and touched Max's fur, his hands trembling but his touch firm. The dog had kept him safe. The storm had come again, but they had faced it together, and together they had survived. Max slowly turned, his body stiff with pain, and began to move forward once more. His steps slower now, but no less determined. The baby, still clinging to Max's side, followed, his fear beginning to subside as he realized that they had made it through. They had escaped. Together. The world around them had begun to shift again. The stillness of the forest broken by the steady sound of Max's breaths. The battle with the wolf had left him exhausted, his once pristine coat now marred by deep cuts and scratches. Blood, his own and the wolf's, stained his fur. And though he moved forward with the same unwavering determination, the physical toll was evident. His body was tired, but his spirit remained unbroken. He was a protector, and that meant his fight wasn't over until the baby was safe. The baby, still shaken by the encounter, walked closely at Max's side. His small hand rested on Max's fur, the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing providing a sense of comfort that he had come to rely on. The baby's heart, still racing from the confrontation, began to slow with every step. He had never witnessed such a display of strength and courage before. Max's bravery, his willingness to face the unknown and protect the baby at all costs, had left an indelible mark on the child's heart. But as they walked through the quiet forest, the baby's mind began to churn with the weight of everything they had endured. The world outside was vast and unpredictable, and he was only a small child, vulnerable in ways that Max would never be. He had learned to rely on the dog's strength, but in that moment, the baby wondered if he was strong enough to face what lay ahead. The fear, though quiet, still lingered in his chest like a weight that threatened to pull him under. Max, sensing the change in the baby's demeanor, slowed his pace, turning his head to glance at him. The baby, his small face pale and tired, looked up at Max, his wide eyes filled with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. There was something in the baby's gaze, something that spoke of the silent question he had been carrying since the battle with the wolf. Will I be strong enough? Max, though wounded, lowered his head, his warm eyes meeting the baby's. He didn't need words to answer. Instead, he nudged the baby gently, urging him to stay close. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. I will always be here. You are not alone. The baby's heart beat a little faster, the reassurance washing over him like a balm. He had come to understand, in the moments of danger and fear, that his strength did not have to come from himself alone. It came from the bond he shared with Max. A bond that had been forged in the fires of the storm, in the struggle for survival, and in the quiet moments of trust that they had shared. Together, they had faced every challenge that had come their way, and together, they would face whatever came next. They moved on, the steady rhythm of Max's breathing a constant source of comfort. The forest, though quiet, felt different now, more alive, more present. The baby, despite his lingering fear, began to walk with more purpose, his small legs growing steadier with each step. Max's presence beside him, the warmth of his body, the silent strength that radiated from the dog, was all the baby needed to keep moving forward. But even with Max by his side, the baby's mind continued to race. The memories of the wolf still fresh in his mind. What if something else came? What if they weren't strong enough to survive the next challenge? He looked up at Max again, his tiny face filled with a question he couldn't yet voice. What happens when we face something we can't fight? Max's eyes softened as he gazed down at the baby, sensing the depth of his fears. He had seen this before. This internal struggle, this quiet fear that gripped the heart and mind of those who had experienced danger. It was not just about physical strength. It was about finding hope when all seemed lost. Max knew that the journey they had taken together was not just about survival. It was about growth. And growth often came in the moments of vulnerability, in the moments when fear seemed insurmountable. Max stopped and turned toward the baby, his body blocking the path ahead. The baby, unsure of what was happening, stopped as well, his wide eyes searching Max's face for an answer. Max lowered his head, nudging the baby gently, encouraging him to sit. Though the baby was still tired, his legs aching from the long journey, he obeyed, sitting down next to Max, who curled protectively around him. The two of them sat in the quiet of the forest, the world around them still. The sound of the wind had died down, leaving only the soft murmur of the stream nearby and the distant call of birds. For a moment, time seemed to slow, and the baby's breathing became steady, matching the rhythm of Max's. The baby, his eyes still filled with uncertainty, looked up at Max once more. Max's gaze softened as he nudged the baby's small hand, urging him to rest against the dog's fur. The baby hesitated at first, but then, sensing the dog's warmth and presence, he relaxed. He lay his head against Max's side, feeling the steady rise and fall of the dog's chest. In that moment, the baby allowed himself to be vulnerable, to trust in the comfort that Max had always provided. Max, ever the guardian, sat still, his body an immovable wall between the baby and the world. The baby's small hand, resting against Max's fur, was a silent testament to their bond. He didn't need words to understand what Max was offering. It wasn't just protection. It was reassurance. It was the quiet promise that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And with that promise, the baby's heart slowed, the fear that had lingered within him beginning to ebb away. He wasn't alone. Max was with him. The storm that had raged outside was nothing compared to the storm that had raged within him. But now, sitting beside Max, feeling the dog's protective presence surrounding him, the baby realized something profound. The storm within him had not disappeared, but it had shifted. It was no longer something that could control him. It was something he could face. The baby's hand tightened around Max's fur, the trust between them deepening in ways he could not fully understand. He was not just a child in the wilderness. He was a survivor. And with Max by his side, there was nothing they couldn't face. As they sat together, the world outside seemed to fade. The forest, the snow, the challenges, they all seemed distant, as if the bond between Max and the baby had created a space of peace and safety, a place where fear could not reach them. The storm had passed, both outside and within them, and in its wake, there was hope. Hope for the future, hope for the journey ahead, and hope that, no matter what came, they would continue to face it together. The world was silent again, but this time, it felt different. The winds had calmed, the storm had finally passed, and a gentle blanket of snow stretched out beneath the trees. Max and the baby had made their way deeper into the wilderness, the landscape shifting from the dense forest to a more open, barren expanse. It was a place where the wind had carved deep drifts into the snow, where the landscape felt both desolate and beautiful. But even in the serenity of the moment, there was an undercurrent of danger, a tension that Max couldn't ignore. Max moved with purpose, his steps slow but deliberate, each one calculated. His senses were still alert, his body tired but unyielding. He had been through battles before, had faced many dangers, but something about this place felt different. There was a heavy weight in the air, a sense that something was coming, something they could not escape. The baby, though growing stronger with each step, still clung to Max's side, his small hand resting on the dog's fur as they moved forward. Max had always been a protector, but now, more than ever, he could feel the pressure building within him. He wasn't just worried about his own survival or the baby's physical safety. He could sense something darker on the horizon, something that would test their bond in a way neither of them had yet experienced. They were not just facing external dangers now. They were about to face something far more dangerous, the threat of separation. They walked on, the snow beneath them crunching with each step. The baby, though tired, still held on to Max, his small body moving more confidently now, the strength he had gained over the past days evident in his steady steps. But even as the baby grew stronger, there was a quiet tension in his heart, a nagging feeling that something was wrong, something he couldn't yet understand. He had learned to trust Max completely. But now, with each step they took, he couldn't shake the feeling that this journey was about to take a turn they hadn't anticipated. The atmosphere around them seemed to shift. The trees, once full of life, now appeared twisted, their branches reaching up like skeletal hands clawing at the sky. The sky itself had grown darker, the clouds swirling in a way that felt unnatural, like they were pulling the very light from the world. Max's head turned sharply, his ears flicking as he listened to the wind. The quiet had become oppressive, heavy, as though the world was waiting for something to happen. Without warning, a distant noise reached Max's ears, low at first, but growing louder. It was the sound of something large moving, something coming closer. The baby, sensing Max's sudden stillness, looked up at the dog, his small body pressing closer to Max's side. The fear that had been a quiet whisper in the back of the baby's mind now surged to the forefront. What was coming? What danger lurked in the shadows of the snow-covered landscape? Max's body stiffened, his muscles coiling, his eyes scanning the horizon. The baby's heart raced, the familiar sense of fear flooding back. He clung tighter to Max's fur, his hands trembling. But Max didn't respond to the baby's fear with panic. He remained calm, his body rigid and alert, every sense attuned to the sound that was drawing closer. The baby didn't know what to do, but he knew one thing: he couldn't leave Max's side. Not now. Not ever. Then, the shape appeared. It was a figure moving through the snow, its form large and ominous. The creature was tall, its silhouette towering over the snow as it moved with a slow, deliberate grace. The baby's heart skipped a beat as he realized what it was: a pack of wolves, their eyes glowing with hunger, their sharp fangs gleaming in the dim light. They were coming toward them, their bodies rippling with muscle, their instincts focused on their prey. The baby's breath caught in his throat, and his grip on Max's fur tightened. The wolves, though not as large as the one they had encountered before, were still a formidable threat. Their collective presence was overwhelming, and Max knew that they had no choice but to face this threat head-on. Max's body went rigid, his teeth bared in a low growl that reverberated through the still air. The baby, though terrified, stayed close, pressing himself against the dog's side, his heart pounding in his chest. He had faced fear before, but this felt different. The wolves were closing in, their eyes locked on Max and the baby, their hunger palpable. There was no escape. The only option was to fight. Max took a deep breath, his muscles coiling, ready to face the wolves. His instincts screamed for him to protect the baby at all costs. He was prepared to fight, to defend with everything he had. But something in his heart told him that this moment would be different. He couldn't fight them all. Not without risking the baby's life. The wolves were almost upon them now, their growls filling the air, their steps silent in the snow. Max stepped forward, his body a wall between the baby and the oncoming threat. The baby, still shaking with fear, could feel Max's resolve, could sense the dog's unwavering determination. This was the moment when the stakes were the highest, the moment when everything that had led them here would be tested. And then, as the first wolf lunged toward them, Max made his decision. He turned, his eyes softening for just a moment as he looked at the baby. In that brief, fleeting glance, the baby saw something that he had never truly understood before: sacrifice. Max wasn't just protecting him out of duty. He was protecting him because he loved him, because he would do anything to keep him safe. Max was willing to face this danger, to take the risk, because he knew that the baby's survival meant more than his own. Max lunged forward, meeting the first wolf with a ferocity that sent it tumbling back into the snow. The baby, still unable to fully understand the weight of what was happening, screamed out in terror, his small body shaking with fear and confusion. But Max was relentless, his body moving with a grace and power that only a guardian could possess. He fought the wolves with every ounce of strength he had, each movement calculated, each attack precise. But in the chaos of the battle, something went wrong. One of the wolves, larger than the others, managed to get behind Max, sinking its teeth into the dog's side with a vicious snarl. Max let out a sharp yelp, but he didn't falter. He fought through the pain, his body pushing forward as he struggled to protect the baby. The baby's heart stopped as he watched Max struggle. Fear surged through him again. This was the moment when Max would sacrifice everything to keep him safe. The baby couldn't let that happen. He couldn't let Max fight alone. Without thinking, the baby acted. His small hands grabbed a stick from the ground, and with trembling arms, he swung it toward the wolf attacking Max. The wolf hesitated for just a moment, its attention diverted by the baby's sudden movement. That was all Max needed. With one final, powerful motion, Max broke free from the wolf's grasp, sending the creature tumbling into the snow. The remaining wolves, Seeing their comrade fall hesitated, their hunger giving way to caution. Max's growl grew louder, more commanding, as he turned toward the baby, his body standing firm between the child and the wolves. And in that moment, the wolves knew they were not going to win this fight. One by one, they turned and retreated, disappearing into the trees with growls of frustration. Max, though injured, stood tall, his eyes never leaving the baby. The battle had been won, but the cost had been high. The quiet that followed the retreat of the wolves felt surreal, like a heavy fog lifting after a long, suffocating storm. The snow, still falling gently around them, now seemed to take on a different tone, softer, less oppressive. Max stood over the baby, his body bloodied and bruised from the fight, but still resolute. His eyes, though wary, never left the baby. The bond they shared had been tested to its breaking point, but now, with the wolves gone, there was a new kind of silence between them. It wasn't peace. It was the quiet after a storm, the kind that left behind something unspoken, a lingering tension that could never truly go away. The baby, still trembling from the fear of the battle, reached out a small, trembling hand, his fingers brushing against Max's fur. The dog flinched slightly, a low whine escaping his throat as his muscles, strained from the fight, shifted under the pressure. The baby could feel the pain in Max's body, the toll that the battle had taken. He could see the deep gashes on the dog's side, blood staining the white snow beneath them. Max's eyes met the baby's, and in that brief moment, the baby understood the weight of what had just happened. Max had risked everything, his life, his safety, for the baby. He had faced the wolves not because he was fearless, but because he was willing to sacrifice himself to keep the baby safe. Tears welled up in the baby's eyes, but he didn't cry. The understanding between them was too deep, too real. He knew that Max had always been there for him, always been the protector, the guardian. And now, for the first time, the baby truly understood what it meant to be protected. It wasn't just physical safety. It was about the willingness to stand in the face of danger, to give everything to ensure the other's survival. Max had done that, and in doing so, he had shown the baby what love and loyalty truly meant. The baby's small hand rested on Max's side, gently touching the dog's bloodied fur, a silent promise that he wouldn't let Max down. He couldn't bear to see the pain in Max's eyes, the exhaustion that weighed so heavily on the dog's frame. The baby, despite his own fear and exhaustion, knew that the journey wasn't over. They still had a long way to go, and Max needed to heal. He needed to rest. And for the first time since the storm, the baby realized that he wasn't just the one being protected anymore. It was time for him to be strong for Max. Max's body stiffened as he felt the baby's touch. The dog's heart swelled with an overwhelming sense of gratitude, and yet there was a deep, gnawing pain in his chest. Physical, yes, but also emotional. The toll of the fight had not only been physical, it had forced him to confront something deeper. His role as a protector had always been clear, but this time, he had come dangerously close to losing the one thing he had been protecting. The baby. His trust, his bond with the child, had been tested in ways that Max had never anticipated. And though he had fought through the pain, through the fear, there was a part of him that feared what might come next. Max stood still, his large form blocking the baby from view of the rest of the world, his eyes scanning the horizon, alert for any further threats. But inside, he was struggling. His protective instincts had always been his greatest strength. But in this moment, they felt like a weight he couldn't carry alone anymore. He had been there for the baby through every challenge, every danger. But the fear of losing the baby, of failing him, had settled deep into Max's heart, more than any wound the wolf's claws had inflicted. Max, though injured, moved slowly, nudging the baby forward. He could feel the child's hand resting on his side, the baby's small body pressing closer to him as they walked. The baby had grown in ways that Max had not expected. He had faced the wolves, had stood by Max's side, even when fear had threatened to consume him. But it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about growth, and Max had learned something in the process. That the baby was no longer just the one being protected. The baby was learning to protect, too. In that moment, Max knew that their journey wasn't just about keeping the baby safe. It was about both of them learning to be strong, to be resilient in the face of the world's harshest challenges. They walked together through the snow, the distance between them and the danger now great, but the journey still far from over. The baby, though exhausted, felt a sense of clarity settling in his chest. His trust in Max had never wavered, but now, something within him had changed. He was not just the one clinging to the dog for safety. He was learning to stand tall, to face the unknown, to carry the weight of their journey together. It was no longer just about survival. It was about learning to thrive in a world that had shown them both its darkness. And together, they would find the light. Max moved on ahead, his steps slower now, his body aching from the fight, but his resolve unbroken. He had always been the one to lead, to protect, but as the baby walked beside him, a new sense of hope stirred in Max's chest. It wasn't just the dog that had to carry the burden of protection anymore. The baby was stronger now. He was growing, and with each step, he was learning what it meant to survive. To fight, to live. And Max, in that moment, felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before: hope. Hope for the future. Hope for the journey ahead. The baby, though still young, had become his equal in ways Max hadn't fully realized. Together, they would face the world, not as protector and protected, but as partners, each carrying the other forward, each learning and growing in ways that would bind them together forever. They moved forward, side by side, through the snow, with the weight of their shared journey behind them, and the promise of the road ahead.